When Elias stumbled upon the tiny kittens hidden in the old stable, he was filled with a calm joy, a type of happiness that only someone deeply attuned to the natural world can feel. He had no idea that in just a few short months, this small discovery would evolve into something entirely unexpected. Elias was a man who spoke little. His hands were rough and weathered by the cold air and decades of hard farm work. He had inherited a wide stretch of land in the rugged highlands of Northton Valley, tucked at the foot of mountains that wore a crown of snow for most of the year. Amid his carefully tended crops and the stacked piles of firewood he kept ready for the bitter winters, he lived alone but never felt lonely. His favorite place was the porch at the front of the farmhouse, where he would sit holding a steaming mug of strong black tea. From there, he watched the icy breath of the peaks and the quiet wanderings of the wild animals that sometimes crept onto his land in search of shelter. On one particularly bitter morning, Elias noticed that his heavy leatherwork gloves had vanished. He remembered leaving them in the stable the previous evening, so he trudged there to look. He rummaged through dusty wooden crates, shifted rusty tools around, and lifted bundles of dried reeds. That's when he saw something that made him pause. There were the gloves, nearly buried under a heap of straw. But they weren't alone. Nestled behind the pile of dry hay, curled up so tightly together they seemed like one single creature, were kittens, tiny, silvery gray with dense, plush fur and eyes that were barely open. They watched him with a sharp, unblinking intensity that seemed almost too focused for creatures so young. Elias took a slow step back. Their behavior wasn't like the typical barn kittens he was used to seeing around his farm. Usually, those were scrappy little things, nervous but playful, mewing for food. These particular kittens, though, had something wild and resolute in their eyes. Their fur was thicker, their expressions cautious but not fearful. He stayed there, not daring to move, as if the chill of the stable air might help him understand what he was witnessing. The kittens huddled deeper into the straw, their tiny bodies seeking warmth and safety. A troubling thought whispered in Elias's mind. Where was their mother? All his years of tending to animals on the farm had never shown him kittens this young, without a mother anywhere nearby. "Where did you little ones come from?" he murmured, his voice lost in the cold air. He wondered briefly if someone had left them there, thinking they'd have a better chance of surviving in the relative warmth of the stable. Or maybe they were the offspring of a wild cat, forced to fend for themselves too soon. No matter how he turned it around in his mind, Elias realized this wouldn't be a simple puzzle to solve. He decided to try the simplest method first. He placed small strips of fresh rabbit meat nearby, hoping the smell would coax them out. But the kittens either ignored the offering entirely or sniffed at it with suspicious care. Maybe they were too young for solid food. Or maybe they were something entirely different. Even their movements felt different. They didn't play or tumble around like regular kittens. Every motion was cautious, deliberate, their bodies low and silent as if the world was a place to be carefully tested. When he tried to offer the food by hand, they growled softly and backed away, muscles tensing. Elias realized he would need to take a different approach if he wanted to help. He put on a pair of thick work gloves, the same kind he wore when splitting wood or mending wire fences, and moved slowly, crouching low so as not to seem intimidating. "Easy now, little ones," he said in a gentle tone. "I'm not here to harm you." One by one, he carefully lifted the kittens and placed them in an old wicker basket lined with a tattered but soft blanket. They yowled in protest, tiny voices scratchy and fierce, but none of them bit or scratched him. None of them were hurt. Back in his farmhouse, Elias cleared a corner of the small laundry room, the warmest and most peaceful spot he had. He stacked cardboard boxes and tucked in old towels to create a cozy labyrinth of hiding places. A temporary sanctuary for the wary newcomers. He left the basket partly open and stepped away, letting them emerge when they were ready. He believed that trust could never be forced. It had to grow naturally, at its own pace. For days, the kittens didn't move much at all. They stayed curled up together, peeking out from the soft folds of cloth only when they thought he wasn't looking. But soon, the curiosity of the farm's other animals began to change the quiet atmosphere of the house. Elias's older cats, used to him and to each other, approached the laundry room in slow, cautious steps. They sniffed the air around the basket, watched the kittens with wary but gentle eyes. Elias's heart quickened every time he saw those moments of tension, unsure if the fragile peace might shatter. But to his astonishment, something ancient and instinctive took over. The oldest cat in the house, a patched-up tabby he called Misty, began to spend more and more time near the basket. She moved with a dignified calm, as if she carried the wisdom of countless seasons. She sat there for long hours, a quiet guardian at the threshold of the kitten's world. Then one day, as if guided by some ancient magic, Misty began to produce milk for the orphaned kittens. "Well, look at you," Elias said in wonder, watching her lie down and let the tiny kittens crawl up to her. "You've decided to be their mother, haven't you, old girl?" At that moment, everything changed. The kittens pressed against Misty's warm belly as though they'd known her their whole lives. The other cats of the farm slowly accepted the newcomers, and the kittens who had once been silent and suspicious began to eat the bits of meat Elias left for them with growing appetite. They even watched him with wide, curious eyes as he sat at his table, as if they were trying to understand him, too. In those quiet, flickering moments, Elias felt a gentle warmth growing inside his chest, a happiness that came not from control, but from the humble acceptance of something he couldn't fully explain. After nearly a month had passed, Elias decided it was time to call in some expert advice. He reached out to Bernard, the elderly veterinarian from the nearby hamlet of Elderglen, and asked if he would come take a look at the unusual kittens. "Sorry for the interruption," Elias said with a chuckle as he explained the situation. "But I've got some very peculiar little guests here." "Peculiar how?" Bernard asked, curiosity clear in his voice. "Just come see them when you can," Elias replied. "You'll understand what I mean." He still wasn't sure how the kittens would react to meeting a stranger, but he hoped that by now they'd learn to trust a little. But nature, as always, had other plans. Spring had only just begun to nudge the landscape awake when a sudden, fierce snowstorm swept through the valley. The dirt road leading to Elias's farm became a white, treacherous barrier that even Bernard's old truck couldn't tackle. So, the visit had to wait. Meanwhile, Elias split his days between his usual farm chores and quietly tending to his strange, growing little family. He still had no idea what exactly these kittens were, or where they had come from. But they were no longer a problem to be solved or a burden to bear. They didn't let him pet them, and they rarely came near him willingly. But they didn't run away anymore either. They existed in a kind of quiet balance with him, somewhere between the wild and the tame. And perhaps, he thought, that was the most fascinating part of all. As the days lengthened and the snow began to melt, Elias found himself constantly pushing the vet visit to the next day, and then the next. There was always something else that needed attention. A fence that had been broken by the wind, a water trough that needed fixing, a calf born too early in the cold. All the while, the kittens grew stronger, their small bodies filling out with sinewy muscle. They began to venture out of the laundry room on their own, padding softly through the hallways. Then one morning, they discovered the world beyond the farmhouse walls. Elias left the back door ajar for them during the warmer parts of the day. The kittens, now sleek and nimble, chose their own comings and goings. Though he still set out bowls of food, he soon noticed that they seemed to prefer the taste of the hunt. Tiny paw prints in the snow and the occasional vanishing of small rodents told him that they were honing their natural skills. "You're becoming quite the little hunters, aren't you?" he would murmur to them when he found the quiet evidence of their kills tucked away in the barn corners. But there was something about their independence that tugged at Elias's heart. They didn't curl up in his lap like Misty did. They didn't follow him around the barnyard or wait at the door for him. They watched him from a distance, their pale eyes reflecting the winter light, calm and assessing. It was as though he was a bystander in their world, present, but not central to their story. Yet even this distant companionship brought him a kind of peace. He came to understand that not every animal's affection looked the same. Some would press close and purr. Others would choose to remain shadows on the edges of your life. And even in that distance, there was a kind of connection, a shared silence that spoke of a wild, shared respect. The barn itself became their kingdom. During cold nights, they would vanish into its dark spaces, nesting between the hay bales and slipping like ghosts into the rafters. When visitors or delivery drivers arrived, they would disappear altogether, leaving no sign of their presence except for the lingering warmth in the straw. Elias, watching them, felt a quiet sort of pride. He decided to make small changes around the farm to help them feel more at home. He dragged hollow logs into the fields, placed large stones in sunny patches of earth, and set up hidden corners where they could rest or hide if they chose. These little additions were his way of saying, "You belong here, even if you live on the outer edges of my world." Many months passed since that first icy morning when Elias found them. Their tiny bodies huddled in the straw. Now fully grown, the cats moved with silent confidence around the farm, leaping gracefully from fence post to hayloft, their eyes bright with the memory of snow and wind. One late afternoon, however, an unexpected crisis forced Elias to finally seek Bernard's help. One of his dairy goats had fallen ill, and he had no choice but to call the old veterinarian out to the farm. Bernard arrived with his worn leather bag of supplies, his lined face calm and patient. He examined the goat and soon had a clear answer. "It's just a mild infection, Elias," he said, patting the goat's neck. "A few days of antibiotics, and she'll be back to her old self." Relief swept over Elias, and as they walked back to the gate, Bernard gave him a curious look. "So those kittens you mentioned a while back, are they still around here somewhere?" Elias smiled a little, feeling almost shy. "They usually settle in the barn about this time of day," he said, pointing in the direction of the weathered wooden doors. "I'd love to finally meet these mysterious cats of yours," Bernard replied. Together, they made their way to the barn. But the moment Bernard's boots crossed the threshold, the cats seemed to melt into the shadows, slipping away as silent as the wind. A moment of silence passed, and then Bernard chuckled softly. "Elias," he said, his eyes alive with an almost childlike excitement. "These aren't your average barn cats. Do you have any idea what you've been looking after all these months?" Elias frowned, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Bernard crouched near a dark corner where one of the cats still lingered, her pale eyes fixed on them without blinking. "Highland Lynx cats," he whispered reverently, as though the words themselves deserved quiet respect. "They're a rare, elusive breed native to these mountains. It's almost impossible to see them up close like this, let alone raise them." Elias stood in stunned silence, letting the words settle in his mind. Suddenly, so much about them made perfect sense. The thick fur, the wild, unwavering eyes, the way they moved like wraiths in the snow. "So they're not supposed to be here with me?" he asked in a low voice. Bernard straightened up, a gentle smile on his face. "Not as pets, no? But what you've done is remarkable. They're healthy and strong. That alone is a rare kind of miracle." Elias shook his head, still in disbelief. "I just did what felt right," he said quietly. With Bernard's guidance and the quiet support of a nearby wildlife conservation group, Elias embarked on a new chapter of this remarkable story. He built safe transitional shelters on his property, worked closely with biologists and field experts, and learned how to prepare the lynx cats for what he now understood was inevitable, their return to the wild. "It won't be easy to let them go," he confessed to Bernard during one of their planning sessions, the mountains outside the window looming like silent witnesses. Bernard nodded slowly. "I know, Elias, but you've given them something precious, a chance to live the life they were meant for. That's a rare and beautiful thing." Elias took those words to heart. He knew that the cat's place wasn't beside his hearth, but beyond it, in the sweeping forests and the jagged ridges of Frost Vale, where the snow melted in spring and the wild rivers carved through ancient rock. Letting them go wasn't easy at all. The first time he watched them slip away into the tree line, their pale eyes flickering once in the fading light before vanishing among the shadows. He felt an ache in his chest so deep it took his breath away. But he also understood something else. They hadn't left because they didn't care. They had simply answered the call of something bigger and older than any human home. They had never truly belonged to him. They had only shared a piece of his world for a while, and that sharing had been enough. Elias found comfort in that quiet truth. He watched them come and go in the weeks that followed, sometimes padding silently around the edges of the property, sometimes vanishing for days at a time. He no longer tried to coax them close or call them back. Instead, he watched from a distance, his heart calm, knowing that their place was out there in the wild. And every time he looked up at the white peaks of Frostvale Ridge, he understood that the most profound connections in life don't always come from possession or control. Sometimes they come from a simple, humble act of protection, of holding space for something to grow and then letting it go when the time is right. The Lynx cats never became lap cats. They never let him stroke their fur or curl up in front of his fire. But their presence, the whisper of their paws in the snow, the gleam of their eyes in the half-light of dawn, filled the farm with a kind of magic. They were no longer kittens. They were survivors, hunters, wild souls meant to roam free. And standing on his porch, with the mountains rising like ancient guardians all around him, Elias realized that was enough. It was more than enough. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story of wild encounters and unexpected connections, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps bring more incredible animal tales to life. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you found those little Lynx cats?